Hello and welcome. My name is Brandi Joan. You can find me at Brandi Joan across all platforms, and today we are sewing up one of my newest patterns, one of my first of 2024, number M8446. It is this special occasion dress that is fairly simple, pretty elegant. It has a nice high slit, which we may all know by now. I love a high slit, a pretty cowl neck detail, and a nice closed back. So let's get to it. Before I get to sewing any of my pattern pieces, I like to apply my fusible interfacing to anything that needs it. So the first thing I'm doing is applying the interfacing to the two back facings of the dress. Now I'm setting those facings aside for later and bringing over my front dress to start sewing. And the first thing that we're going to do is sew the gathers on both sides of the dress in between these two notches here. Then we're going to finish the top facing of the dress with something like your serger or a zigzag or anything that will stop that from fraying. And we're going to do the same thing with that slit opening all the way down. To gather my dress on the sides, I'm going to set my tension all the way up, and I'm going to set my stitch length all the way up as well and sew a straight line, and that will help gather the fabric for you. Then all you have to do is adjust it to your liking. And for my top facing and my slit, I'm going to be using my serger, finishing the edges. Once you've gathered your sides and finished the top, it should look like this. Nice and clean edges. And now we're going to do the same thing to our side facing piece, right where the slit opens, just like we did with the front piece. All right, so now we have a finished edge on both sides of the slit opening. So we're going to pin the front and the slit extension together. We're going to pin them right sides together along this curve before the slit opening. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're lining up our notches. We're going to pin that in place. And we want to sew down from the top all the way down to this dot right here before the slit opening. And we're going to sew that with a 5/8 seam allowance. Okay, once you have those two pieces sewn together, it should look like this on the front, and on the back it's going to look like this. So now we're going to go in and clip that curve a little bit and then press it nice and open so each side is going towards the outside of its corresponding pattern piece. Once you have that pressed nice and flat, we're going to set this aside for later and bring over our loop piece. So once we have our loop piece, we're going to fold it in half lengthwise, pin it, and then we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from this folded edge. Right, and because my fabric is a little bit thicker, I am going to trim off a little bit of this seam allowance. If you have a nice, thin, slippery fabric, you probably don't need to trim any off, but I do. And now I'm going to turn this right side out, and I'm actually going to use a bobby pin for this one because it is the only tool that I can find right now. Then you can either hand stitch or use your machine to make sure that loop stays together at the end. The instructions do say to hand stitch, but I'm going to go bring this over to my machine and sew it with my machine. All right, and once we have our loop sewn together at the end, it's going to look like this, and we can bring over our left back piece. And on the outside, we're going to baste this loop to the back piece at this dot here. And remember, we want the closed end of the loop to be facing the armhole over here, so you can see. And we're going to baste that down. Okay, so once you have your loop basted down, it should look like this. And now we're going to set it aside, bring over our right back and our zipper. And we're going to prep our zipper by folding the zipper teeth out and setting our iron to the lowest setting so we don't burn the zipper teeth. And I'm gonna let this cool down and grab my ironing board. Ironing mat, I should say. Then I'm going to have my zipper open and gently roll the coils out while pressing lightly. Okay, and now we're going to bring that dress right back over. And we're going to position the right side of the zipper face down at the large dot here. And we want the top stopper to be right at that dot. Okay, and then we're going to pin that all the way down. And now we're going to bring this over to our machine and we're going to stitch the zipper in place. Remember, before sewing your zipper down, you want to switch to your invisible zipper foot. It's going to make things a lot easier. All right, and once you have the right side of the zipper sewn to your right back dress, as always, you want to make sure your zipper still zips up before sewing down the remaining side. And this does still zip. So we're good to sew the next side. And we're just going to sew that in the same way that we did the right side. So we're going to make sure that our zipper stopper up here lines up with that large dot and pin it in place. Okay, and once again, bring that over to your machine and sew that in place with your zipper foot. All right, so now we have both sides of our zipper sewn in. And again, we want to check and make sure that zips up, and it does. So now we're going to sew the remaining back end of the dress together. And we want to start right where we stopped sewing the zipper in. And then sew that starting at the zipper all the way down to the hem using a 5/8 seam allowance, starting again right where we stopped the zipper at that seam. And before sewing the rest of our back closed, we do want to again switch back to our normal presser foot. All right, and now that we've sewn up below our zipper, this is what we're working with. You can see here, that you shouldn't be able to see where the zipper ends and where the seam starts. And it's looking pretty good. So we're going to press that seam flat and open now. And I don't think I've mentioned this, but because I'm using something velvety, I'm not fully pressing things unless I have a press cloth over it. I'm mostly using steam, so that way I don't mess up my fabric. All right, so once everything has been pressed nice and flat, we're going to bring over our facings that we've already applied our fusible interfacing to. This side and for that side. And right sides together, we're going to pin the curved necklines together. Then, along both of these neck edges, we're going to sew them in place with a 5/8 seam allowance. Okay, so now we should have our facings sewn to our backs, just along that neck opening from dot to dot. So now we're going to open this zipper back up, and we're going to pin the straight edge of the facing with the back all the way down, making sure that that zipper is encased in between the facing and the back. And then we're going to bring this over to our machine, and with our zipper foot again, we're going to sew just up to where the zipper ends, and then we're going to switch to presser foot and then sew up the remaining facing to the back, and matching up the little stitch line that we have here, we're going to stitch all the way up. All right, so again, we want to switch back to our invisible zipper foot, and we're going to sew this facing to the back, making sure that we are paying close attention to where our zipper is. So you can see here, I've sewn up to the zipper stopper. So that way I can twist the top of the zipper that really isn't going to do anything for us into the rest of the seam allowance. So now we have a nice clean edge at the top. So I'm going to switch back to my regular presser foot. So once again, I'm making sure that the zipper top is tucked all the way in to that seam allowance. You can see it's over here. And then I'm going to start at that line that I left off at and sew all the way up. All right, so now that we have our facings sewn all the way in, we're going to trim off these corners on both sides. Then we're going to clip the curved edge a little bit as well. And then we're going to turn both of these right side out, pushing that loop out, making sure our zipper is rolled the right way. Same thing with the other side. I'm going to trim just a little bit more off of this one. And because this side doesn't have that loop to help pull it out, I'm going to use my scissors and gently push that corner out. Push and roll. And again, check that our zipper is correct. Trim that. Okay, so now when we zip our zipper all the way up, if we don't get it tangled in the dress, you can see that we have a nice, clean, closed edge here. And now the last thing we're going to do for our facing is we're going to understitch as far as we can on the inside. So we're going to push our lining towards that facing and top stitch about 1/8 as close as we can to this edge here. Okay, and with that understitching, it does just create a nice cleaner edge here and along the neckline. So now we're going to bring over our front piece. It's been a while. So we're going to grab that and we're going to lay these pieces right sides together. And we're going to match up the shoulder seams and the dots. This. And we're going to pin them in place. Like this. So if you're looking at it the way that the instructions show you in the illustration, you can see here that you have these shoulders pinned together like this on both sides. On the other side, again, it looks like this. And we're going to sew these together with a 5/8 seam allowance, starting here and ending at this dot that you see right here on both sides. So it's going to seem kind of like a diagonal stitch line going this way. All right, and once you have your front sewn to your back, the stitch line again should be this diagonal ending at the large dot on both sides. So then we can, flip this right side out. So you can see that that built-in neck facing just creates that clean edge now that it's folded onto the inside. And that also gives you that like cowl neck look. So now the next step is to fold it right side out again, because we are going to sew the side seams together now. And on these back pieces, we do have these notches here and here that show us where the gathers we made on the front should fit into. So we're going to pin right at the armhole. Then starting at that notch, we're going to gather it nice and even so everything is spread out along those notches. And this is really a personal preference. Okay, and I think that for me looks good. Everything is within those notches. It seems fairly even. So now I'm going to pin that in place. And then continue to pin all the way down. All right, so then I'm going to sew all the way down that side seam, starting at the armhole, ending at the hem. Then I'm going to repeat those steps on the remaining side. All right, and with that, the base of our dress is done. You can see you have this ruching on the side, or, gathering on the side. There's a nice clean closed neckline. So all that's left to do is close these armholes and hem the bottom. So we're going to bring over our arm facings, and we're going to sew both of them together along this short side here. Right. So bring those over to your sewing machine and sew them in place. All right, so once you have both of those sewn up, we're going to take one and we're going to start to attach it to our armhole. Okay, and remember we want this to be folded wrong sides together. And we're going to match up that inner seam with the seam on this binding. Pin that in place. And then pin it in place all the way around that arm opening. All right, and once you have that pinned all the way around the armhole, you're going to sew that in place and then repeat it on the other side. Then, once you have that facing sewn on, you want to turn it to the inside and top stitch it closed on the outside. But first, if you have a slightly bulky fabric like mine, you might want to trim off that inner seam allowance. Now all that's left to do is hem the dress. And what we're going to do is where we pressed this on the seam allowance, we're actually going to flip that around like this. So what we're going to do is sew from the fold right to where it ends here. Then we're going to go ahead and trim that corner off. Fold this right side out. So that gives a nice closed edge on the corner. Then we're going to slip stitch the rest of the hem up all the way around and sew the button on. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you love your new dress. And if you like this dress, you may like my other early spring design, which I'm actually wearing right now. It is number M8447. It is this sweatsuit that you can dress up or down. As you can see, I wore it with heels in the product shot, which I love. But yeah, you might like it. So check it out and consider giving me a follow at Brandi Joan across all platforms. See you next time.